Happy Mindful Monday and welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Mezzo. Thank you so much for joining me. I've had so much fun bringing you episodes 1 and 2, and I am excited that you are back for episode 3. As always, before I get into any topics or conversation matter, I want to remind you that this is not intended for medical use, nor is this intended to replace any sort of medication or doctor. I do encourage you to talk to someone if that is something you are interested in, if that is something that may help you. But this podcast is purely a reflection from one artist to another on how to be an artist, what it's like to be an artist, and how to get through some of the trickier things that we are faced with as artists. Today, I would like to discuss the topic of the non-compete or the compete. Now, keep in mind, this episode may not be your cup of tea. You may not agree, and that is okay. I want to start conversations, but mainly I want to be a resource for the artists who have never had someone talk to them about these things. I would have loved to have heard about competitions before I started to do them. And I think it would just be incredibly helpful to get information like that as an artist ahead of time, or to hear about other people's experiences. So please, if you have experiences you'd like to share or questions you'd like to ask, as always, I am open to hearing them. So this episode deals with the negative feelings around competition and is for people who do not love to compete and maybe feel that not loving to compete means that they are inferior. If you do like competition, that is a-okay. And I'm sure that your colleagues who don't would love to hear your opinions and your feelings. There is a lot of what I would call an obsession surrounding competition culture, especially in the performing arts. For musicians, this often stems from the idea that we are fed that you are not a good musician unless you are essentially the only musician. Some ways that we may internalize this are that we may not feel good at our craft unless we win. We may not feel that we are worth hiring if we are not the winner. We may feel, or we may have been made to feel, that we do not want it enough if we are choosing not to compete. There are so many things that we can add to this list. I know that often there can be a sense of confusion. I personally felt a large sense of confusion when I was watching everyone around me compete and talk about competing. And I thought, well, I don't really think I want to do that. And I was so confused at the time. I was so green, and I had left one academic journey for another in the performing arts, and stepping into the performing arts with very little wherewithal of what was going on around me. I was so confused as to why everyone felt the need to compete all the time. And again, this is my personal experience. The people around you may not feel the need to compete. They may not be competing, or maybe they are and they're open about it. I was so confused, and it was something that I felt was very gate kept. The idea of competition was you were only privy to it if you were in on it, which I think is silly because competitions are often made public. They're often posted publicly for anyone to apply, for anyone to grab the posting and run with it. And that was something that so confused me, because you'd hear all about competing and auditioning and applying, but when you asked people for help, they would turn their nose up at you and say, well, just figure it out. And so for me, it was a lot of confusion. I was quite often feeling inferior for not knowing where to start, and then even more inferior for not wanting to do it once I figured it out. Once I, learned where to look for things, I was like, well, this isn't really what I want to do. why am I feeling these negative feelings towards something that I didn't know about until a month ago? But now all of a sudden I've shouldered this burden. This is something that is my responsibility to do. So if you're feeling anything of that nature or even remotely close, then I encourage you to join me on this very quick journey of self-discovery today, where we really lay down the foundation for why we may be feeling certain things and maybe how to reframe and rethink certain ideas. My first question for today: why do we feel the need to compete? Simple. Why do we feel the need to compete? Not simple. Something that fascinates me about that pageant mindset in the performing arts is that we are often fed it by the people who did not get to where they are by competing. Now, let me say that again. We are often fed the idea that we need to compete by people who did not get to where they are now by competing. This is an unspoken truth that I have seen and I have heard and I have commiserated with other artists. We are often pressured by teachers and people who are superior or older than us that you have to compete to be someone, or you have to compete to be something. When in fact, our teachers, our superior colleagues, our friends who might just be older than us probably didn't have to compete 20, 30, 40, even 50 years ago to get to where they are now. The industry now is so inundated with people dying to compete and people dying to get their names out there that we kind of lose sight of the fact that it wasn't always like that. There wasn't always social media. There wasn't always a website with application postings and auditions. You usually knew someone or knew something, or you traveled and auditions were a little more tangible. Competitions were probably fewer and far between. But now, those same people who climbed the ladder pretty gracefully, it's a little harder to do now. The people that climbed the ladder fairly gracefully are telling us we have to throw ourselves at the ladder and hope that we can get a rung. But that might not have been what they did. And we internalize that what our teacher or what our older colleague or our professor, we internalize that what they say is so important. And if they mention a competition or application once, we panic, because surely if my teacher or my colleague or my professor said that I have to do this, then I have to. And that's just not always the case. They may be speaking out of a place of suggestion. They may be saying, well, I think you could do this, or I think you should do this, but we internalize it as something much more serious than it really could be. In my very cynical brain, I want to ask if this is a gentle form sometimes of a veteran or newbie sabotage as well. If your predecessor didn't need competition to secure a job, why do you? Now, I do not mean this in a general sense, but I have seen many instances where a colleague or a friend will come to me very upset and say, well, my teacher said I have to do this. They said I have to do this, and that if I don't do it, they're going to be really mad at me, and they're going to essentially disown them in an academic or a professional way for not competing or for not applying to something, or not applying or competing for a program that their teacher has a tie to. And I think that this is such a lost topic, or a very waxed over topic, where we kind of just glide on by and kind of glide past the topic because we don't want to upset a teacher. We don't want to be disagreeable. And so we do what they say, or we agree with our colleague, or we just kind of don't say a word. When it's almost unfair that someone could be mad at them or upset that they didn't want to, or maybe they didn't choose to apply for a program that their professor suggested or that their professor has ties to, or, that they didn't inherently want to compete in order to get to the next step. My next question is, does the need to compete maybe come from a more primal need to be the top dog and show off? If this is the case and you don't want to compete, there's nothing wrong with you. You may not want to show off. You may like being in the background. You may like being ensemble. You may like being second violin. You may not want to put yourself out there for the full concert master, for the prima donna, for the leading guy. You might not want to do that, and that's okay. I think that feeling the need to compete when we don't want to is maybe a way we can kind of disconnect ourselves from what we think our purpose is. So that leads me to ask, is feeling the need to compete when we don't want to a way we can convince ourselves to maybe leave the industry? I've heard things from colleagues and friends like, well, I decided my career wasn't right for me when I couldn't convince myself to enter competitions. Or, I decided this wasn't the thing to do because I hate competing, and if that's the only way that I can get work, then I won't. So I walked away. So I went somewhere where I didn't have to compete to feel valued. But if you were feeling this, I wonder if it would be a good idea to make yourself a list of career pros and cons and check in with yourself honestly. If you want to change the path your career is on, you absolutely can without needing another way out, so to say. Explore other options within your career and find the outlets that make you happy and that make you want to be there. If you really, truly do not like your career and it's competing that has shown you that that is what you don't like the most, then by all means leave. But if you think that it's just competing, and if you truly feel that the only reason you want to leave your career is because of the competition, then maybe stop competing and see if you like the career better. Work smaller jobs or work bigger jobs that have less high stakes. Work jobs where you're not put in front of a panel and made to compete with the next greatest soprano or the next greatest French horn player. Work jobs where you feel comfortable walking into the room, where you don't feel like you are pit against someone else, or where you personally may be pitting yourself against someone else to get somewhere. Do things that remind you what you like about your career and why. And again, that list of pros and cons, if you truly feel like this is not your career or not your goal career or your dream career, make a list of all the reasons why you do like it or did like it and all the reasons why you don't. And if the reasons why you don't are reasons that are out of your control, just, it doesn't pay, it doesn't make you happy, it doesn't let you work the hours that you want, then by all means, absolutely. But if your list of cons is sometimes I feel inferior and sometimes I don't like it and I get mad at myself and I don't think I'm good enough, then I would encourage you to really, reach out to the people around you for support, reach out to a professional for support, and try to find the pros of the situation, and don't don't take yourself out of a situation because you think you're not good enough, because chances are you're good enough. You got there in the first place. You're here right now, and you are good enough regardless of how you are feeling about yourself in the situation. Just, my friendly reminder that negative self-talk is very strong. We can convince ourselves of almost anything. I think we are incredibly powerful creatures as human beings. We can form opinions in our own mind, and other people can believe them. We can hear something once and not even remember that we've heard it, and we can internalize it forever. And, you could hear in passing someone say about themselves, well, I got second place, so I'm a loser. And you don't even remember hearing that. You just overheard it one day. And for the next 5 years, you can walk into every competition and say, unless I get first place, I'm a loser. But I always like to say, someone has to get second place and third place and fifth. And it is an honor to place it all. It is an honor to place. It is an honor to even be at the competition at all. Showing up is the hardest part. So getting there at all is something you should celebrate. And being on a stage or in an audition room or in front of a panel is such an incredible feat and such an incredible accomplishment to be able to put yourself out there. You're like a public speaker times 1,000. You are playing or creating or singing or whatever your performing art is, or your job in general. You are doing that so vulnerably and so honestly for a bunch of people you've never met before. And if your first thought walking out of the room after you've completed your craft is, well, I'm not very good and I deserve to lose, then I think we need to reframe. And maybe we need to, have a chat with ourselves about what we do before we walk in the room. And we can absolutely address that at a later date as well here on this podcast. How to prepare yourself for a vulnerable or stressful situation, an audition, a competition. But just remember that if you're telling yourself negative things, your experience will be negative, because that's just what you've internalized, because you are a strong, powerful human being, and that is how we function. We get an idea and we run with it. So, going back a little bit, how can we reframe competition? For example, what if I want to compete, but I don't like it, but I truly want to be a competition musician? I like to, in this situation, reframe or redirect my negative feelings or my concern or my anxiety. To reframe the competition in your mind, try having an honest conversation with yourself. Here's a good example that I've seen or used. I really want to do this competition, but every time I compete, I know everyone is looking at me and hearing all of my wrong notes, my bad facial expressions, my terrible posture, the way I breathed, etc. Instead, I challenge you to level with yourself. Remind yourself that most everyone is probably feeling this way and probably isn't looking at you or judging you. I remind myself sometimes rather crassly that the people around me could care less. They really could care less if they wanted to. And they, or maybe they couldn't care less. Maybe they already care at 0%. So I'll often worry, what are the people around me thinking? And I used to get so wrapped up in that, especially early on in my journey. I used to get so wrapped up in the concept of everyone is looking at you and everyone is judging you and everyone hates you. And I got so tired of it and so sad about it and so stressed that every time I walked on a stage, my hands would just shake and I couldn't get them to stop. And one day I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, who cares? They are all so concerned about themselves. Why would they even bother looking at me? Why would they think negative things about me unless I've already given them the fuel for the fire? If I walk into a competition or a performance or an audition and I have a bad attitude and I start talking badly of myself and I say, well, I'm not very good, so I can't imagine I'm going to get very far. The only thing that people are going to hear when I open my mouth is very jaded opinions of my voice because I've already told them what to expect. If I walk into an audition and I have an angry face or I'm like not necessarily shaking, but if I'm really upset or if I'm nasty to the panel or if I say, like, well, we'll see what happens today, and then I go to sing for them, all they're going to hear is the preconceived notion that I gave them. There is the psychological concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think that as performers, we often offer a self-fulfilling prophecy before anyone else has the chance to honestly and genuinely hear us. We are more comfortable. I think it feels safer if we walk into a room and we say, get ready for some terrible singing, and joke about it or give it a shroud of negativity, rather than walk into a room and say, get ready for me to sing your pants off. And so going back to that idea of, I can bet nobody is really paying that much attention to you anyway. When you walk into a room full of colleagues, they're really thinking about themselves, or at least from my experience, people are really thinking about themselves. There's a handful of people who are genuinely in the moment, but we are all so wrapped up, and I've been guilty of this. We're so wrapped up in ourselves as performers and our next move, and we're concerned. It's a very stressful, very vulnerable career that we often don't look outside ourselves to see what other people are doing because it's safer on the inside. It's safer to worry about yourself. And I know in the past few episodes, I've mentioned the concept of being self-centric. Absolutely. Self-centric, taking care of the self, making the self the center of what you do, and taking care of that self being the center of what you do. But there are also self-centered minds, and there's a difference in my head between being self-centric and self-centered. Of course, we can discuss that. You can feel free to leave comments or questions about that. I would love to chat. Just, some things that I personally have thought of, and that's where that comes from. But just remember that as humans, we are going to worry about ourselves first. And I promise you that as you are worrying about yourself and worrying about what everyone around you is thinking and looking at, and the list goes on, that they are not worrying about you. So just remember that if you're in a competition and you're feeling some negative things, you can reframe it as well. If you want to be having fun right now, tell yourself it is okay to do so. Besides worrying about everyone around you and what you're doing, ask yourself fundamentally, do I want to be having fun right now? And if the answer is yes, then have fun. Let go a little bit. Shake out your hands, roll your shoulders back, take a deep breath. If you want to be having fun right now, performing your favorite art, you deserve to be having fun right now. Remember that it is okay to have these negative feelings surrounding competitions. It does not make you any less of an artist, person, or winner. Whether you win or lose, you showed up, which is about 95% of the battle. I know you may think that's a little controversial, but I think that waking up, putting on your audition best, and showing up is 95% of the battle. What you do in the room, maybe 5%. What you do to celebrate after, I'll give that 1 or 2%. You're really only in a competition for a tiny fraction of your day, let alone your life. It is just a blip on the radar of your life. You have thousands and thousands of hours lived that a 3-hour audition day, or travel audition, travel home, or however long it takes, is such a minuscule amount of time in the grand scheme of your life that I would encourage you to not get too hung up on it, because realistically, you can do it again tomorrow if you want. You can do it again next month. You're not married to just this one situation. And no matter how it turns out, you can always do something else. You do not have to live in that moment forever. And remember, most importantly, you are talented no matter the outcome of the competition. You are talented no matter what happens in a competition setting. Understand, for me, that competitions are often a game of chess or checkers, whatever your favorite game is of strategy. If you reframe this way and remember that it is all a game of strategy and all a game of choices, you can take some of the personally charged feelings and responsibility out of it. Remember that the judges, the panel, the professors, they have opinions that may determine results. So if you don't make it this year, I challenge you to understand that maybe you're not bad and maybe you're not a loser. You just may not be their missing puzzle piece this year. But you could be next year. So what does that mean to me? Well, I like to say when I walk into an audition or a competition, I will say to myself beforehand, and I started doing this when I was a kid because it was just the only way I could really get through it. But I started saying to myself beforehand, I'm going to give them an audition that is going to tell them why they should hire me or why they should pick me for the part or why I should win, etc. If they decide that I am not the right person for the part and I am not the right person for the job, then I'm going to be grateful that they did not waste my time hiring me for a job that wouldn't have fit me. Now hold on. Whoa, that's a lot. Present me wants to pat past me on the shoulder and say, just because you think you're good enough for a part, and you probably are, doesn't mean that you are the best fit for the job. This is something that has, in my better part of a decade that I've been in this career path or on this career path, this is something that has not been explained to me very tactfully or at all, to be honest. When I'm presented with an opportunity to audition or compete, it is often followed by, well, if you don't get it, you're not good enough. I don't like that, because if there's one role or one spot for principal violin and 400 people audition, I don't think that 399 of them were not good enough. The performing arts are an industry. It is an industry. Just like working in accounting, working in construction, working as a news reporter, working as an electrical engineer or a teacher. When you walk into a job interview, when you apply for a job and you walk into your interview, you may have 110% of the credentials that are required, but you may not be what they specifically had in mind. So I want to say that again. You may not be what they specifically had in mind. That means that they may have come in with a preconceived notion or idea of who or what they wanted to fill the missing, puzzle piece. They may have had an idea of what that missing puzzle piece looked like. They may have been looking for it for a while. They lost a piece of their jigsaw puzzle under the coffee table and they've been looking for it, and your aunt brings over a new puzzle and hands you a piece and you go, well, I can't use this. It doesn't fit my puzzle. That has nothing to do with you, and it's not something that is a personal responsibility. You may have given 130% instead of 110 that day, and they may still only need someone at 90%. They may only need someone who fits certain criteria or who has a certain very specific experience on their resume. To me, there's no difference between a regular, 9 to 5 job and a performing arts job in that respect. An application and an interview are no different than an application and an audition or a competition in my mind. You can be absolutely convinced that you are the perfect person for the job, and honestly, you probably are. But the people judging or adjudicating or, making the final say may need someone of a completely different set of skills. And that does not mean that you are any less of a competitor or a performer or an artist. It just means you're different from what they were looking for. And instead of getting down on yourself, I encourage you to reframe it in a means of gratitude. If you don't get something, don't get mad at yourself. Don't say, I didn't deserve, I didn't deserve to be there anyway. I wasn't good enough anyway. Don't retroactively, or even, prematurely, but don't retroactively say, well, I wasn't good enough anyway. I gave a really bad audition. You didn't. I can assure you, you did not give a bad audition. Just because you didn't get something doesn't mean you should retroactively bully yourself and hate yourself and be mean to yourself. Instead, and it's hard, but instead reframe it in a means of gratitude. You walking in to a competition setting, you don't necessarily know everything you're competing for. You may be competing for a specific role or a specific place in a competition, but there are things that the company will need you to do that they haven't necessarily put out on the application. There's fine print. Assume ahead of time, and this is bold for me to just tell you to assume things, but assume ahead of time that you don't know everything that you're competing for or that you're auditioning or applying for. And when you get to that point of competition, if you don't make it through to the next round or don't get the role or the spot that you want, reframe with gratitude. And here's a prompt that I like to use. I will say, I gave a great audition, and I'm so grateful to myself for being there, for showing up. I'm really proud of myself. I didn't get what I wanted, but it's okay, because I'm grateful they didn't waste my time putting me in a role or having me continue with auditions for something that they probably didn't see me as a good fit for. Because if they didn't see me as a good fit for it and they hired me anyway, it probably would have been very stressful for me. And that's not a bad thing, to be grateful that you weren't put in a situation of stress. I know I've mentioned in episodes past that we often only know how to exist in a stressful situation. And so we assume, well, even if I'm not good enough, I'll figure it out. No, if you're not the right fit for something, you are good enough. You're just not the right fit. You shouldn't squeeze yourself into the wrong size shoe and walk around in it just to say that you're wearing it. It's like Cinderella's stepsisters, Cinderella had a glass slipper. That glass slipper is, say that's the competition. That's the role that you want. That's the chair in the ensemble that you want. The glass slipper is the end goal of that competition. It's the prize, so to say. There is someone out there who is Cinderella. There is someone out there who is walking around with the exact correct custom shoe size. I may be one of the stepsisters, and I may be shoving my whole foot into that shoe, and it will never fit me. And I can be upset about it, that the shoe doesn't fit. I can be upset because I don't get to wear beautiful crystal shoes. Absolutely, I can be upset about all those things. I can be sad. I can grieve a loss of something that I really wanted. But what I really can't do to myself, honestly, after all the hard work I've put in, I really can't sit there and say to myself, well, you just weren't good enough to fit into that shoe that wasn't your size. You weren't worthy enough because you couldn't shrink your foot overnight to fit a shoe that wasn't your size. And you know what? I'm going to be grateful that I do not have to force my feet into shoes that are 4 sizes too small and walk around in them just so that people can look at me in those shoes. I would rather get a pair that fit and walk around in them comfortably when it is my time to do so. And I know y'all are probably tired of keeping up with my analogies, but think of it that way. Or, if you choose to, think of it that way. What if we didn't force ourselves into a pair of shoes that didn't fit, just to say, well, I sang for this company. Well, I got first chair at this ensemble where I wasn't really a good fit, but, I did it, but I did it. I think the "but I did it" mindset is so common. Well, but I did it. It's on my resume. That's fine. It can be on your resume. But, how do we make it, how is it most optimized for us? How do we make it feel the best for us? And I think the way that it is the most optimized, the most optimal, and the best for us is when it is the right fit. So, going all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, friends, if you don't like competing, ask yourself why. Now, you do not have to compete. But if you do want to compete and you don't like it, try to approach it from a place of gratitude. Try to reframe and rethink. Remind yourself that it's likely that nobody is looking at you. Nobody else is around you is concerned. And that when you walk into a room with an audition panel or a competition, don't give them a self-fulfilling prophecy that's negative. You can tell every single person in that space with just your overall demeanor, your aura, that you are there to win in a positive way. Don't tell anyone that you're bad, because you're not bad. And again, it's easier to be stressed than it is to be not stressed. So often we'll just let people think we're terrible because it's easier. It's easier to be stressed that people are worried about us. But if we don't tell them that we're bad, or that they should expect something bad, then they won't. Trust that the people around you have the ability to have the benefit of the doubt, and that the people around you have the ability to see the good in you and the good that you can do. So, my friends, if you are competing now or later, best of luck. Don't forget, you're doing a great job, and you are talented no matter the outcome. You are worthy no matter the outcome, and you are a valid performer no matter the outcome. Now, if you're not operating any heavy machinery or driving any cars, I would invite you to breathe in 5s with me to end today's Mindful Monday. So we're going to breathe in for 5, hold for 5, breathe out for 5, hold for 5, and you can pause and repeat as needed. So with me, get ready to breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you for joining me today for another Mindful Monday. My name is Sabatina. I'm the Mindful Mezzo, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.